So, Bismillah, Alhamdulillah, Salatu Wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Firstly, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to you all here today to the meeting organized by Community Foundation in partnership with a number of leading Muslim organizations. This is a session that we call Community Question Time, which we've been organizing for many, many years, holding people of authority and influence to account by the community, asking them important questions and getting to hear what their thoughts are. And this is exactly what we're doing today with Liam Byrne, the candidate standing up for the West Midlands Combined Authority mayoral position. We know that in the West Midlands, the Muslim community make up 10% of the total population, and that's almost double the national average. And that's something very important for all of us to understand. And the fact that Muslims come from a diverse ethnic background, from Bangladeshi, from Pakistani, from Arab, from Somali, from African Caribbean in the main. And the fact that also Muslims preoccupy in areas in the main where there's high levels of deprivation, there's high crime, high overcrowding, very poor housing. And there are issues around health inequality, there are issues around high unemployment, particularly of young people. There are serious issues with regards to low educational attainment and so forth. And a lot of this is compounded around racism that they experience and face, and also Islamophobia, which is a growing concern across not just the West Midlands, but nationally. To keep this meeting sort of manageable, we only invited a dozen organizations. There are over 30 organizations involved, and I'll quickly make mention of those so that the participants and also Liam in particular is aware. So MEND, obviously, they've introduced themselves. Midland Muslim Society, that's actually an organization operating across the West Midlands. They have over 1,000 paid members, who span across all the towns and cities. Jamia Muslim Islamic Center, one of the oldest mosques established in 1976, almost 100,000 footfall in a year. Darul Uloom Boys Secondary School, one of the oldest Islamic schools in the West Midlands, and commands a significant respect and support from all sections of the Muslim community based in Small Heath. We've got Birmingham Masjid and Dawah Center with members from Sandwell and North Birmingham. Masjid Noor, again, one of the oldest in the area, purpose-built mosque. Lozelle Islamic Center, relatively small mosque, but has an extensive active and influential members. Darlaston Mosque, which has just been introduced by Bashir, the chairman. Then you've got the Bangladeshi Caterers Association, again, a national body of caterers and networks of people in the hospitality sector. MAB West Midlands, Birmingham ISOC, Coventry ISOC, Al Manara Foundation in Yardley, Al Rahma Islamic Center, Cockney Masjid, UKIM in Wolverhampton, Harun from Walsall, Aisha UKIM Mosque, Muslim Student House, and also Stand Up to Racism. So a whole gambit of organizations that have been involved in discussions. We've already had a meeting with Andy 2 weeks ago. And so basically, Liam, the questions that we're going to be asking you is exactly the same thing. What the community want to understand is that the election is out there on the 6th of May. Basically, it's very important that the Muslim voices are heard, and also that we know the responses from the candidates that are standing to see how they will respond, should they be elected as the mayor, to those key matters and concerns in their office and capacity as the mayor of West Midlands. So we'll start off with our first question, which is coming from Bashir. So Bashir, if you want to ask the first question to Liam. Sorry, just before that, I apologize. So in terms of the agenda, we're going to be finishing around 1 o'clock, but Liam's going to have an opening statement beforehand. So basically, Liam, this is an opportunity for you to flag out your key drive and your key message that you want us to respond to. This program is being recorded. Like I said, we didn't actually invite all the members because it just gets a bit too technically cumbersome to manage. People will be watching it on YouTube later on, both all the organizations that I mentioned and their members included. So Liam, over to you. A few minutes for you to basically introduce your work and what is it that you're seeking to gain from becoming the mayor of West Midlands.
Perfect. I mean, thank you so much, and thank you for organising this during the holy month of Ramadan, and for taking time out today to organise this. This is a really important debate, and I want to just kick off with 5 very quick points. The first is a profound thanks. In many ways, this campaign that we're launching now for the Mayor of the West Midlands is a coalition of people who have come together, who are frustrated about the world as it is today, who are frustrated about the state of the West Midlands today, who are frustrated about the plight of Muslims in the West Midlands today, as well as internationally, but who have come together to argue for change and to try and grab hold of the power and the resources of the mayor in order to effect that change. And many people who will be watching this, and indeed many people who are on the call today, have been people who have profoundly influenced that journey over the last few years. So thank you is the place I wanted to start. The second thing I wanted to share is that much of the politics that we're trying to put forward has deep roots in faith. I myself am what's called a struggling Catholic. I was brought up in an Irish, a family of Irish culture. My personal inspirations are in Catholic social theory, which is about how, which became an important part of liberation theology around the world, but which traces its roots back to Matthew 25:40, which has a verse at the core of its inspiration, which is, truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Those were the words of Jesus. The idea here being that you need to treat, when you treat the least of us, as Jesus called them, you are treating, in our view, the Messiah himself. As I've worked with Muslim groups and academics over the years, I've been profoundly influenced by the Charter of Medina and the overlap in many of the teachings between Christianity and Islam. And in particular, the Charter of Medina is something that I use a lot when I'm talking to mosques, when I'm talking to young people, as the kind of inspiration of people living together in harmony and justice. That is a model which I think we should be using to try and steer by here in the West Midlands. And many of you have been my teachers in this, and for that I'm profoundly grateful. The third, I guess, point of departure really for the campaign is that in many ways this campaign started outside Digbeth coach station in a soup kitchen that was run by the mosque on Poets Corner, Umma Care Foundation, and a number of other people from a Christian community who were teachers in my constituency. And when you're running these food banks, when you're running these soup kitchens, it's heartbreaking to see the queues around the block. And as I began to develop my work with the homeless community, I became increasingly angry at, okay, seeing the great wealth of the city, seeing the cranes in the sky, seeing people dying in doorways. And then in my own constituency, after about a year after I started that work, we had an incident where the Aston and Nechells Food Bank literally ran out of food. In the second city, in the sixth richest country on earth, food banks literally ran out of food. And this work with the homeless community, this work on food banks created such a moral outrage for me. Ultimately, that was the inspiration, the source of energy, the source of anger, frankly, in choosing to run for mayor. And the work that we developed, what we called Operation Compassion, again, it was an operation that many people helped with. I suppose the next point, the next kind of influence in this campaign is then obviously much of the work that I've done serving what is today the biggest Muslim constituency in Britain over the last 16, 17 years. And in particular, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've been quite deeply involved in a number of, I guess, high profile inquiries and reports into discrimination, economic and otherwise against Muslims. So the Citizens UK Commission that was chaired by Dominic Grieve, the all-party group on Muslims, their research work on definitions of Islamophobia, my own research work. I was also, as a member of the Council of Europe, involved in creating reports there. And I think, that has helped me see both the policy and the practice over the last 5 or 6 years of how far we've got to go in the West Midlands in combating the kind of discrimination that is defining the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in that region. But, it's all very well writing reports, but reports are words, and what we need is action. And so again, a lot of the ambition for me and for people involved in my campaign for mayor is that we've written the reports, we've helped write the things. The point is to turn that into action. And then I suppose the final piece of the puzzle is that I do believe in using positions of political influence and positions of political power to stand up and fight for the causes that we believe in. And so although this election is for a mayor, what you've seen in mayors like Andy Byrne are political leaders who are prepared to use the platforms of power to argue for justice. And as many of you know, because you've worked with me on this, the campaigns for justice for Kashmir, the campaign for recognition of Palestine, the campaign for justice and salvation for the Rohingya, these are important campaigns that I have been deeply involved in over the last 5 or 6 years. As some of you know, I'm currently the subject of a targeting operation by some pretty nasty elements in India at the moment because I don't pull my punches on issues like Kashmir. But I'm not going to pull my punches on issues like Kashmir because I believe that political leaders have got a responsibility to call out injustice and to stand against it. That's partly why we elect political leaders. So I'm not going to make any apologies for that, and I will continue to use the position of mayor in order to argue on some of these important international issues. So, we've published a manifesto. Many of the answers to your questions, actually, your excellent questions, are in that manifesto, and I'm happy to go over those again this morning. When the elections were delayed by a year, we chose to write the manifesto in a slightly different way. So I said to the team, look, let's try and be the first people to ever try and write a manifesto from the bottom up. So over 10,000 people have contributed ideas and comments to this manifesto, which is why I genuinely think it reflects the ambitions of the people of the region. It's not a pipe dream. It's not pie in the sky. The stuff that we've got in our manifesto is doable, and it will make a significant difference to everybody in the region, but to the Muslim community in particular. And inshallah, God willing, we will succeed in May and begin to turn some of these ideas and ideals into action. I'll stop there. Hopefully that's enough to get the ball rolling.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Liam. Just within that, obviously, as you know, the pledges that we've pulled together, Liam, we've passed a copy to you.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on signing up to those pledges? There are 3 areas that we've identified which are key concern, and obviously they've got sub-pledges within them.
Yeah. I mean,
do you want to digest that?
Do you want me to go through them one by one?
If you can give your overview first, and then if there's any that you can't do, explaining why you can't, and the ones that you can do, just letting us know.
Yeah. To be honest, we're pretty content with all of it, because the thinking that you've put into this is very similar to our own thinking that's gone into our manifesto, and its deep roots in many of the reports that I cited earlier. I think the one subtlety that I want to draw out is around the Muslim Equalities Task Force, because what we propose in the manifesto, again, it's based on a lot of our experience in government and in power, because my observation is that sometimes when you set up standalone task forces, they do their work, they do their research, but there is always a risk that the report is then left on the shelf. So we've had to think about this quite deeply, and so we are proposing a kind of a commission, an overarching commission on climate and justice, economic justice in particular, which will provide the North Star for us. It will provide the long-range policy work around issues to do with the common good and just transition. And we see that as a place where we will bring together people who share an ideal about the common good. So, for example, trade unions, many campaign groups, climate justice campaigners. That is almost like our policy council that we think should provide the long-run thought for what the mayor does. So we think that, I don't know whether you'd call it a task group, but it's certainly a group of people to work on Muslim equalities who could report into that Economic and Justice Council, because for us, that is a way of guaranteeing that the ideas that are developed actually go into the mainstream and are then woven throughout the entirety of the mayor's office, if that makes sense. So rather than having something that is standalone, separate, and risks being diminished, or writing reports that don't have an impact, we think it is almost like a mother lode, like a source of ideas that come into our Economic and Justice Commission, because that's the way that we best guarantee the ideas are actually mainstreamed throughout the organization. So that, I mean, hopefully, you know, that sounds sensible. It's, as I say, it's based on our experience of getting things right and getting things wrong in government, basically. The need to mainstream policy, we just sort of think is incredibly important. Otherwise, it risks not having an impact.
Yeah. So what would be useful? Liam, we'll go into our questions now, but if you can get back to us on an email, just to explain the places that we've actually said.
Here, but yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah, if you can get back to us on an email, so then we can circulate to all the members, so they know exactly where you stand with regards to those pledges. I think that'd be more useful for them to quickly read through. So we'll definitely do that. We've got a few people who've joined us. Which I haven't introduced. Shoaib Afzal from MEND, and also Hussein Rabi as well. And then we also got Dr. Saad, who's just joined as well. So they can introduce themselves quickly when they do the questions. So we'll just quickly move on then. The first question, so Bashir, you're asking question number 1. So Bashir Ahmed, the chairman of Darlaston Mosque. You need to unmute. But
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Liam, I think it's the question. It happened in your patch, the Trojan horse, Underton Road School. It was in the media all over the place. The Muslim children and as well as parents raised lots of concerns about the scandal. They were vilified. They were attacked. Their value sets and beliefs were mocked, and Islamophobia went increased because of the incident. If you are elected, you know, as a mayor, how will you ensure these kind of things don't happen again, and the community is protected from those kind of, you know, incidents and kind of, you know, outcome of these incidents and so on?
Yeah. So I was deeply involved in de-escalating and deconflicting both of these conflicts. The Anderton Park is not in my constituency, but the Parkfield School was. And, you know, we were successful in de-escalating the protests around Parkfield School because I got very stuck in very quickly in order to broker the dialogue. Now, I have to say, I have to be honest about my experience of working on those issues, because in a way, both issues had similar root causes, and that is the academy system. That basically means that the schools are run almost as dictatorships from the Department for Education, and the role of parents in helping steer the school is almost eliminated. So, you know, I believe in equalities education, but I believe in all of the protected characteristics. But what I saw going wrong time and time again is parents basically being marginalized in the way decisions were implemented. And, you know, that is a kind of an ongoing problem with the academy system. So, you know, I believe in inclusive education. I believe in all the protected characteristics. But ultimately, the challenge that we've got in the education system, and indeed across a lot of the public sector in the West Midlands, is that the power structures of public services do not reflect the diversity of our population. And that is as true today as it was when I first called it out as the regional minister 12 years ago. Now, Andy has done, he has, I think, done some inquiries into why our public leadership is not as diverse as the population. But, you know, I did that report 12 years ago Since then, we have had 10 years of Conservative administration in which things have gone backwards in many ways, not forwards. So based on that experience, my best answer is that we have to actually act to diversify the leadership of public services in the region. And that involves a couple of things. It involves robust conversations with ministers, because ultimately they are the people who appoint people. But second, it also means dramatically expanding leadership training for people for a much more diverse set of backgrounds than we have today. And the mayor actually intervening in some of these decisions in order to make the change happen. We're at risk today, frankly, of being in the same position in another 10 years' time, unless we get serious about changing this. And I've just, part of the reason for running for mayor, frankly, is that I'm so sick of nothing getting done, that you have to take a decision at the end of the day to try and roll up your sleeves and do something about it. So yeah, that's the kind of insight from being sort of pretty deeply involved in this over the last sort of 5 or 10 years.
Okay, thank you.
It's about power.
Yeah, and it's also about understanding. And the key thing is, everybody has their own values and their own associations and attachments. And the key thing is that we are a diverse community here across the West Midlands, and the right for each of us to have our own faith and values is important. Equally, we want to sort of force somebody else's views or values down somebody else's throats. I think that's equally respectable, and that's something that basically all of us want, is everybody to be able to live together in harmony without being infringed upon by somebody else in terms of them trying to thrust a viewpoint. And I think that's quite key, and this is where we need the leadership to be able to understand and work with everybody. So thank you for that, Liam. Moving on to our second question then, can I ask Azhar Qayyum, the CEO of Mentor, to put your question forward? Azhar, if you just unmute.
That's a good idea to unmute. Yes, Liam, it's well documented that hatred and attacks against Muslims have significantly increased over the years. I mean, it's been an almost exponential rise over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. Will you commit to setting up a body to include grassroots Muslim organizations, representatives to review support provided to the Muslim victims and improve action against perpetrators?
Yes, so this is fine, and I'm just going to share with you, just on the chat there, some of the research that we started in Hodge Hill actually a few years ago, and we used this research to help influence the Citizens UK Commission on Islamophobia, on Muslim issues, and also the all-party group on Muslims research work on definitions of Islamophobia. So this is something where it is going to take both myself and Simon Foster to get elected. So Simon Foster, I think most people know and would have worked with over the years. This is something that is basically going to sit between Simon and I, but this is something that we're both committed to. I mean, we may get into this a bit later on, but I mean, you'll have seen that we do think the all-party group definition of Islamophobia is something that should be adopted. We know that lots of organisations do not want to adopt that. We know that the government rejected that when we put it forward. But you read the results of my own research in Hodge Hill. Almost everybody has had some kind of experience, either directly or indirectly, of Islamophobia, and it has got a lot worse since Brexit, is the truth. And so we have to do something about it, and that means the kinds of proposals that you've suggested here, in our view.
Okay, thanks for that. With regards to looking at working, obviously, Liam, you recognise that back in the 80s, because I remember working in Tower Hamlets where we led on tackling racial harassment, and this is where, at the end of the day, we realized that the only way of dealing with this problem is to actually have a holistic approach, working with all the key agencies, so the police, working with the probation services, the hospitals, the local authority, housing departments, and so forth, and that we were able to make a significant impact. And Tower Hamlets actually, in the early 90s was leading the way. This was recognized by the Home Office, and I was actually the lead officer for that in the council. And to deal with Islamophobia, we need the same amount of recognition that, you know, it is a hate crime. It's based on a specific set of hate that people perpetrate, both in terms of physically as well as verbally, as well as in other forms and shape. And the only way to deal with this is actually working collectively and including the actual victimized community. So, you know, we look forward to actually working with you and looking at how we respond to this matter holistically and not just in isolation.
The one thing I would just add to that analysis, which I share, is when I was running workshops with Muslim teenagers in schools in Hodge Hill as part of my research work on this, it became really clear to me that one of the virtues of a proper definition of Islamophobia is that it gives you a lot more power to take on Islamophobia in the media. And, you know, young children, often quite young, they're very smart, you know. So when I would ask people, we'd always kick off these workshops by saying, what are your news sources? Where do you get your news sources from? You know, and as you know, young people today are incredibly well informed. I mean, they would talk about the BBC, the Guardian, New York Times, the Financial Times. I mean, they're incredibly well read. But the thing that they always found, you know, just shocking, horrifying, was the kinds of comments that they would kind of read through on the bottom of news articles. Why are we still in a position where that's allowed? You know, so in places like Germany, where they've got NetzDG laws, which are much stronger sets of legislative frameworks for tackling hate speech, these are the sorts of things that we should be adopting here. But at the root of it all is a proper working definition of Islamophobia. Now, you know, as we said in our manifesto, we think the all-party group has got the closest to a good working definition. That is a good definition, and you've then got to obviously monitor against it and enforce against it.
Okay, lovely. Thanks for that, Liam. Okay, moving on to our next question. Shoaib, Afzal, Shoaib, if you want to quickly introduce yourself as well and then ask the question to Liam.
Hi Liam, I'm Shoaib. I'm a volunteer for MEND and the chair of the working group for MEND. Also a long-time constituent of yours, up until very recently. So quick question. So as you may be aware that many mosques closed voluntarily to stop the spread of COVID-19. Mosques are run entirely from donations from the worshippers, and as a result, many of them are now facing financial difficulties, having not been able to collect financial donations. Mosques didn't receive financial support the same way businesses did. Will you commit to looking to offer the mosques that are financially struggling support in terms of finances so they can continue to run? Thanks.
Well, as you know, much of my work, I probably spend more hours helping mosques with fundraising than any other single thing that I do. Sometimes that involves very detailed negotiations with organisations like water companies, which is the current dispute I'm currently brokering for one of my mosques at the moment. So the key to this is basically two things. So one, it's difficult to fund mosques directly as faith institutions, but it's going to be important for the future to work with mosques to fund services that support a wide variety of constituents. Now, there are two ways in which we think this can be done. One of the conclusions that we arrived at in our inquiry into COVID fatalities in the BAME community showed that faith institutions should be used far more effectively to disseminate public health messages than we do today. And what we found is that many of the community groups and organisations working with ethnic minority communities where there is a higher prevalence of chronic disease, those community groups had basically been completely marginalised from the public health system. Now, so we think that is a significant mistake, and we think that there is a significant opportunity for faith institutions to expand the kind of work that they're doing there. Second, we think that there is a particular role that mosques can play as faith institutions around the work of inclusivity, because we need to be doing a better job at bringing people together in some of our poorest communities. Now, at the moment, it's incredibly difficult for anybody to get their hands on art and culture money or grassroots sports money. Again, one of the reasons for running is I'm just at my wit's end with how hard it is for community groups to get their hands on money to take kids off the streets to play football, for example. So we've had a number of talks with Arts Foundation, Football Foundation, Sport England, cultural organisations, and we think that we can persuade them to put a lot of their money for the West Midlands into a single pot. So there's a one-stop pot, fast-track fund, which all organisations, mosques included, can apply to in order for project financing. So we think that mosques are anchor institutions in communities. We need to think about mosques in that sense, and then make it much easier for mosques to basically play that public health role, but also that community project role by expediting the financing, cutting all the red tape that is around it at the moment. So sorry, that is a slightly complicated answer, but again, it's sort of based on a lot of it's
So
based
one
on
of the
the problem solving I've had to do in Hodge Hill over the years, to be honest.
Yeah. So one of the things, if you are elected to the mayor of West Midlands Combined Authority, that you can actually influence local authorities, is that they actually have a discretionary fund given to them by the government to support bodies as they see appropriate, most in need. Unfortunately, none of that money is oriented towards the faith establishments, and that's something that could be leveraged where the fund is already there. So there's not a need for new money to be coming down from central government. The money is already there for local authority to actually use, and this is something that we would hope that a person such as yourself would be able to influence local authorities to actually support, given that we know well established the roles that mosques have played and do play and can potentially play in supporting the community. They're a vital third sector. Okay, thank you for that. Moving on to our next question, Dr. Mohammed Saad, if you'd like to ask question number 4, please.
Yeah.
If you could quickly introduce yourself as well.
Yeah. Thanks for Minda and thanks for Liam for having such opportunity today. Liam, you know that COVID-19 has hit the Muslim community the hardest, with the Black, Asian, Arab, and they are suffering from increased risk and high mortality. This has highlighted in the health inequalities faced by Muslims. Are you going to commit to work with relevant bodies to put in place an action plan to address the health inequalities faced by Muslims?
So the answer to this is yes. So I've just posted the report that we did over 6 months last year in the chat. This for most of us involved, this is probably the most harrowing bit of public policy research we've ever been involved in our lives, because what we basically sought to do when the government decided it wasn't going to do a proper inquiry, we were furious about this, and so we decided to set up our own inquiry. I talked to Baroness Doreen Lawrence about how to do this, what would be most helpful, and what we tried to zero in on is what were the stories behind the statistics. So the government was giving us lots of statistics, but actually what we wanted to hear about is the lived experience of people. And so we organised a number of hearings to hear from these poor families who had lost. And it was just heartbreaking. But what we tried to do is to then draw out the lessons, and there were 10 big lessons. Fear, the fear of what services people would get was a big deterrent that led a lot of people to suffer in silence. Many people, our ethnic minority community is disproportionately on the front line, not just in the health system, but in the education system and in the transport system as well. People felt voiceless, so people did not trust the fact that they would be heard and their needs heard. There was the wrong data was being collected, so we couldn't track the performance. There was obviously a terrible disruption to the grief and the grieving process, which we think creates significant risks of mental health challenges later. The public health messages that were communicated to the ethnic minority community were very poor. The groups that were working with the ethnic minority communities were underfunded. The more diverse a community in the West Midlands, the deeper the cuts to public health budgets had been. PPE was a scandal that we obviously know a lot about, and there was very little confidence that the system would change. So those are 10 pretty big conclusions from this report, but that is why the action plan that we've sketched out, we think is really critical, because this will happen again. We now have zoonoptic outbreaks about every 5 years now, and the world was unlucky this time that this was just especially contagious. But if it was both contagious and deadly, if this was as contagious as COVID and as deadly as Ebola, then this would have been a real catastrophe, as opposed to simply the catastrophe that we've had. So we have to learn the lessons from everything that's gone wrong, and radically adjust our health system to adapt. And we can't do that by just relying on health professionals, however well-meaning, sitting in an office. This is our health service. We run it, we staff it, we pay for it. So we've got to be a player in helping design the plan for action.
Right. Well, it's good to hear that you recognise the need, and also the unfortunate numbers of people from the BME community who are affected by certain health inequalities. And it's something that actually hits the system, that affects all of us eventually, both financially and also with regards to the drain on the system. So being proactive and having a national strategy to look at the issue can actually help everybody, irrespective if they're actually directly impacted by health inequalities or not. So it's good to hear the work that you've also done on that. Okay, thanks for that.
The only other one thing I would add is that we're not there yet on the vaccination program either. So some people on this call know. I mean, I fought a running battle without any help from the mayor, I might add, to try and get the vaccination data published. And I've managed to get it for Birmingham, and it revealed what I feared it would reveal, which is that the vaccination rates are 50% higher in richer places than poorer places. But the nature of COVID means that we're not all safe until everybody is safe. Exactly. So driving through on the vaccination progress, that is unfinished business at the moment, and the mayor should be doing an awful lot more on that than he is today.
Clearly. Thank you for that. Moving on to question 5, Haroon from Walsall. Haroon, if you want to unmute, that's it.
Muslims face serious discrimination and limited employment opportunities. Our youth have the highest unemployment rate in the region. What have you done to date, and how do you seek to address youth unemployment amongst Muslim youths?
Yeah. So the key work that Hodge Hill, as you know, has got the highest youth unemployment in Britain, and the fact that our constituency is 1.5 miles from the front gate at Jaguar Land Rover tells you everything you need to know about how broken our skills system is. Basically, the big piece of work that I've done over the last 7 or 8 years is to create the East Birmingham Inclusive Growth Strategy. So I basically was the first to realise that when High Speed 2 was going to arrive in Birmingham, that was going to create 40,000 jobs at the airport and about another 60,000 jobs in the inner city. But the risk was that East Birmingham was going to be an oasis of inequality in this rising prosperity. So I persuaded a lot of stakeholders, DWP, Birmingham City Council, government, to basically create a research project into the level of inequality in East Birmingham, and to begin to identify the 3 or 4 big system changes that are going to be needed. So that means about £1 billion worth of transport spending to connect our community in East Birmingham to the job opportunities. It means overhauling technical education. It means transforming mental health services, and it means transforming health systems as well. So the new hospital that we want to drive through at Arden Cross, I'm talking to Queen Elizabeth Trust to basically make sure that that has got a mission to tackle health inequalities at its absolute core. So this is, if you basically put the constituents in East Birmingham together, that is that's like the fifth biggest city in Britain. But it's frankly, it's taken me over the last 5 or 6 years to kind of zero in on the opportunity and insist that people start doing something about it. That approach that we've developed over many years is the approach that we've put into our plan to tackle youth unemployment that we publish in the manifesto. So we have a youth unemployment emergency. We've had youth service cuts of 80%. The apprenticeship system's collapsed by 40%. We've got youth unemployment of over 20%, and we've got knife crime that's risen by a third in the last 3 or 4 years. So the plan we've got involves putting youth workers back in every neighbourhood, because young people spend 72 hours a week outside school. So the youth centres and the youth service become incredibly important. It means overhauling the mental health services that we've got, because the mental health services are not supporting young people in the way that they could. We've had 1,000 children in 5 years present in Birmingham A&Es having tried to kill themselves or self-harm. That's an incredible statistic. But then building a technical education system that connects our young people to the jobs that are actually available is the third part of the puzzle. So, so again, we've tried to design a manifesto and a policy plan that is based on reality. So we the people involved in it, we live and serve Muslim communities and inner city communities. So we know what works. And frankly, the reason we're running for mayor is that we know what difference we could make. Because if we have another Tory mayor who works for a Tory prime minister and a Tory government, we're just going to get more of the same. And more of the same isn't going to work. More of the same is just going to deepen the inequalities that we've got. Okay, the big companies in the city centre, they'll do well. They'll carry on building their skyscrapers, and the people behind it will carry on walking off with millions. But what about kids in Small Heath? What about kids in Alum Rock? What about kids in inner city Walsall? What about them? Who's going to fight for them? We're going to fight for them. That's why we're doing this.
It's good to hear some of your thoughts on this. I mean, my professional background, way back, I'm a qualified youth and community worker. So I've actually spent a lot of my, and I still do that. Even sitting in my office, I enjoy taking kids out on the weekend and still get involved in that. And given the fact that we have such a high population of youth across the West Midlands, and also particularly from the Muslim community, and a lot of them are of voter age. We have a significantly high number of young people who are of voter age. Gone are the olden days where, the elderly community were quite fixated on a certain party to vote. You actually have well ingrained individuals now, articulated individuals and professional individuals who are thinking with regards to how best to make their voices known. And these are the people that we work with, across the organization that we have. We've got reach of over tens of thousands of young people between the ages of 18 and 35. 30, like the Muslim community, they like to think young even when they're like 35, 40. So we include them.
I'm very much aware of that view.
So we include them in that group, but that's a very sizable number. And the trick is to make sure that what you're going to be offering resonate with them to actually get their support to tick that box where it matters in supporting you on this. And this is what we'd like to hear, is how do you ensure that those age band in particular are supported through education, through employment opportunities. And we've got the recent Kick Start promotion coming from the government, and it seems to be a farce. And they're changing the eligibility and then the arrangement, realizing the first approach hasn't worked, and they're now allowing other organizations to move in. But even then, it's not being well thought through. And this is something that we want.
It's ludicrous. Kickstarter today is creating the grand total of 11 jobs a day. At that pace, it will take 7.5 years to get rid of the youth unemployment in the West Midlands.
Yeah. And that's only for 6 months as well.
I'm not knocking Andy, but I mean, he came along and said, I've got this plan. It's going to be the fastest bounce back in jobs. We're going to create 100,000 jobs in 2 years. It's all going to be marvellous. I read the plan. 40,000 of the jobs are Kickstarter jobs. And that is a scheme that is creating 11 jobs a day. It's nonsense. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay, obviously, like I said, there was 12 people, 12 key organizations that we invited today, and one of them who's asking the next question wasn't able to come along due to an emergency. So I'll quickly ask you that question, which is basically what I mentioned earlier on about housing and the crisis with the housing sector. The Muslim community are living in the most overcrowded housing in what are some of the most deprived areas of West Midlands. So will you commit to setting up a strategy to allow the Muslim community in particular, but also the rest of the community, to have proper housing, accommodation of the right sizes, and also affordable housing? The market, as we know, is now significantly going way above their prices, which actually is now squeezing out a lot of, especially young people, who'd like to set up home, move into that, because the affordability is just not there. So would you be willing to work in setting up a strategy to address the housing shortfall and development concerns?
Absolutely. Housing and immigration are my two biggest caseloads in my constituency. In the inner cities, about 1 in 5 people are overcrowded. Now, what that means is that very often, if you've got a family with someone who is disabled in the family, for example, and you've got maybe equipment or something like that, you've got a family living in the most terrible state of overcrowding, with people with disabilities just unable to live any kind of life at all. But also, I'll give you an example of what this means. So just before Christmas Eve, it was about 2 days before Christmas Eve, I got a call from one of our head teachers who had basically said they'd had to go to rescue a family, a Bangladeshi family. Mum, 4 kids, the kids had disappeared, so they'd gone around the house. They got in, found that there was no furniture and no food in the house. And while they were there, a call came through from the estranged partner threatening to come around and kill them all. And so they evacuated the family to the school library. And the head teacher was now ringing me because they were facing the prospect of the family living in a school library over Christmas. And we had to jump in and get the emergency accommodation sorted. And many of these families now who are in this pickle are being sent to Wolverhampton because there's no homes in Birmingham, or they're being sent to live in hostels on the Hagley Road where there's no cooking facilities and there's no play space for the little children. I just think this is outrageous. And again, sorry to be, a bit political about this, but the numbers that Andy Street is using are for the entire West Midlands. He's very proud of his housing numbers, but they include all the houses being built down to the Welsh border. Well, the houses built in Ludlow don't help you if you live in Ladywood. We need family homes, not holiday homes. 85% of the homes built in the region last year were not affordable. 97% of the homes were not for social rent. No wonder there's a housing crisis. So we've said, and we've got a costed plan for this, we need to be at least doubling the number of homes that we're building for social rent. In places like Birmingham, that means getting on for over 3,000 homes over the next 7 or 8 years for social rent, not posh flats in the jewellery quarter, homes that people can actually afford, families. And crucially, these homes need to be in communities where there's good access to healthcare, good access to education, good access to green space, and good access to public transport. We're not, I often say we're not trying to get rid of houselessness. We're trying to get rid of homelessness. Home is where the heart is. It's where you're in a community with people who love you and cherish you. And that, I think, should be our defining mission.
Great. Good to hear your thoughts on that. A very, very important issue. Okay, I'm just conscious of time as well, so I'm going to quickly plod along. Moving on to the next question. If I could ask Hussein Rabi, Hussein, if you could ask question number 7, please. If you could introduce yourself quickly, Hussein, as well.
Yeah, Hussein Rabi, I'm a consultant vascular surgeon in the NHS. You know that there are many organizations, Muslim organizations and charities are actually working on developing the education and the other employment objective in the community. How will you personally be working and engaged with these organizations to develop and support the work which is much needed in the community?
Yeah, so again, we've thought a lot about how we've made progress in Hodge Hill on this over the years. And we think you've basically got to do two things. You basically need the mayor to be a sponsor of civil society with an infrastructure to bring civil society together. But you've also got to be brokering the ability for civil society groups, community groups to get access to assets and resources. So when I was first elected back in 2005, 2006, I began running funders fairs for local community groups. And what surprised me is that people decided to use their time. They'd spend half their time talking to the funders, but then they'd spend the other half of the time talking to each other. And I thought that was really interesting, because actually what was happening is that these different civil society and community groups were forming partnerships and alliances with each other to do things together. And that taught me a really important lesson about the convening power of politicians. And so I do think that we should be using the mayoral infrastructure, the mayoral office, to create almost like an office of civil society, where we are constantly convening groups around change that we're trying to see, to connect them with each other, but also to connect them to the assets and resources that they need. So one of the ideas that we developed with our co-op task force is this idea of co-op innovation districts. And the idea is that you find a particular space, a particular geography, and you're then looking at who are the community groups and who are the cooperative organizations in those particular zones. And then you're bringing them together, you're working out what assets you can transfer to them, and you're working out how you can provide long-term funding for them. So it's a very grassroots model of change, I would say. But in an environment like ours, I personally think it would be a lot more effective, and I think it would dramatically increase the social capital that we have in the region, which is something politicians don't talk about very often, but in my experience, it's probably the most valuable thing we've got.
Okay. I think we somehow lost Thaqib. Seems to be a technical difficulty. So Azhar, if you could answer the next question, please, question number 8. I'm sorry to put you on the spot there.
I know, it's fine.
Yeah, because I just lost, literally, I just saw Thaqib just disappear from the screen. And
Thaqib was there, and then Thaqib was there, and then Thaqib wasn't there.
Yeah.
Considering he runs a well-known podcast, I thought I would think his technical abilities would be better than the rest of us. But yeah. Okay. Yes, Muslims are underrepresented in positions of leadership and employment in senior roles in the public sector within the West Midlands. And there was a big thing about this very recently. For example, about senior posts within Birmingham City Council and within the Commonwealth Games, just amongst a couple of examples. So, what will you do to address this gap?
So I think there's 3 things we can do here. The first 2 are leading by example. So at the moment, there are more people called Ian than there are women with votes on the combined authority. That's how unbalanced it is in terms of gender. But the public leadership of the region is also very white and very male. So my goal is to create an operational cabinet for the combined authority that is both gender balanced and diversity balanced, so that we have political leaders at the top of the combined authority that reflect the region. Second, I think that there is some things that we can do around staffing at the combined authority and the mayoral's team. So things like, you can do things like proper equality impact assessments for all policies. That should be a given. But we also need to overhaul recruitment practices, consider things like name blind applications, because there's been so much. There has been new thinking in how recruitment practices are organised better to ensure that your workforce is more diverse, and we need to be introducing those things to the combined authority itself. And then the third thing we need to be doing is using the mayor's soft power to work with the host of public spending organisations across the West Midlands to basically ask for a timetable at which their boards are going to actually reflect the diversity of the region. So again, this was this kind of observation about the problem of power structures is something that we zeroed in on in our inquiry into fatalities in the BAME community. But what we identified in the health service is true for public spending bodies more generally. And in terms of health and in education, transport and economic development, these things have got to change.
I mean, what would be useful is also having targets. I've worked in a number of local authorities where we actually set specific targets for the top senior management, and I think areas such as Birmingham, West Midlands Police, and also other local authorities. It will be also is another area. I was actually director of Walsall Council many years ago, and again, this was an issue that they raised recently with regards to not having senior BME officials working in those organisations. So it's clearly an issue up and down across West Midlands. So it's something that needs to be addressed, and the way to address it would be to actually set specific targets. So that's something as a mayor would encourage you to be looking into. And I think it's only time now that this issue was actually taken quite seriously. Moving on to the next question. Thank you for that anyway, Liam, with regards to your response. But I think this is a serious issue. In terms of making the change has to come from within. And unless you have the right players with you supporting that change, it's definitely not going to be happening. I mean, the last meeting that we had with Andy was actually before Ramadan, and we actually had more women in this group than we had men. Grilling Andy with a set of questions. But unfortunately, due to Ramadan, we've actually had some apologies from that. Moving on to our next question then, talking business. If I could ask Ghosuddin, the director of Al Miraj Services Limited from Al Miraj Banqueting Suite, please.
Hi, Liam. My question is, Muslim in West Midlands play a key role in supporting the economy through the thousands of small business they run, from restaurant, grocery, butchers, and many other type of retail shop. What support will you be providing to help the businesses, especially those affected by the lockdown?
Great, thank you. So there's two things which we think are important here. So again, the first set of ideas came from our co-op. I'll post a link to it, our co-op task force. So Preston in the north of England have pioneered this model called community wealth building, which is all about keeping the public pound local. So we've spent some time studying their approach, and we think we can make it work in the West Midlands. Preston is a small place, West Midlands is a big place, but basically across the public sector in the West Midlands, we spend about £20 billion a year, but we don't zero in on which of those contracts we can actually place locally. So there is some good practice. So Commonwealth Games has put about 100 million of contracts to businesses within a 30-mile radius, but that's only 100 million when we're spending 20 billion. So we want to set up an office of community wealth building to basically do an emergency audit of all the contracts that are placed, to work out which of those contracts we can place with local businesses that are creating local jobs. Now, just to give you an example, this is an anecdote, but it illustrates a point. There is a significant hospital in the West Midlands who has their catering contract with Brake Brothers. Brake Brothers are literally shipping in food from like Newcastle to hospitals in the West Midlands. And then Brake Brothers is obviously registered in a tax haven, so they're arguably not paying all the tax that they should as well. This is mad. This is completely mad. Why don't we place the contracts with local businesses? That would be better food. It would also be putting food on the table for local business people. So I just think, again, we just got to think much harder about the tools and levers that we've got, and start using them. There are European countries which are smaller than the West Midlands. Why aren't we using our economic power to actually support local businesses? Now, the second idea is this idea I've just posted in the link called the race code. So we've worked with a chap called Carl George to understand this, and we think that we should be asking everyone in the public sector to sign up to good business and good employment charters, which we will work with trade unions to help define. But we think that Carl George's race code, which is a governance code, is one of the things that we should incorporate into that, so that if you're getting a public contract, you need to be doing the right thing for diversity within your business, right the way up to board level. And again, if I sign that, Andy Burnham signs that, Tracy Brabin signs that, Dan Jarvis signs that, Sadiq signs that, then if you've got a group of 10 Labour mayors signing up to a set of business and employment standards across swathes of England, that begins to tip economic power towards businesses which are doing the right thing.
Okay, that's an interesting concept. So we hopefully with gleaming eyes wanting to see that into realization very soon. Moving to our last question, last but not least, Shoaib, if you could answer your question to Liam, please.
Yes, that's great, thank you. So you've touched on this a little bit already, to be fair, but if you were to be elected, would you commit to ensuring that candidates are representative of the demographic makeup of the area where they're standing, particularly those areas where there's a high level of Muslims?
Yeah, so we don't think necessarily, well, we basically think that as a cohort, our party's politicians need to reflect the diversity of the area. We don't think necessarily it's wise. It depends kind of what level you want to go down to, if you see what I mean. So we think, so for example, Birmingham Labour Group, we think has to be diverse enough to reflect the diversity of Birmingham. We believe that in all of our groups across the region. I believe that for the Mayor's Cabinet. You know, it comes back to something Noswell said earlier, really, which is that what really struck me when I was watching the Birmingham Youth Climate Strike protests and the Black Lives Matter protests, this generation that is coming up at the moment are phenomenal. They are collaborative, they're entrepreneurial, they're creative, and frankly, the sooner we hand power over to them, the better. So what we have got to do is to make sure that our power structures have opportunities for this generation to serve, good mentors, and good open ladders for them to climb up. Because in a way, I feel that we need to be accelerating the arrival of this next generation, which is much, much more diverse, into positions of power and influence. And as a political party, this doesn't make me very popular, my own party sometimes, but in my own party, we sometimes do have to break old monopolies of power in order to make this happen. It's why I pushed all women shortlists in the inner city sort of 7 or 8 years ago. I can tell you there were many of my close friends who did not thank me for that, but it does mean that we now have some pretty impressive Muslim women who are very experienced councillors, and they are future MPs in my humble view.
I think the key thing is just allowing an equal playing field, because as we mentioned earlier on, issues around racism, issues around Islamophobia, issues around lack of opportunities clearly detract individuals from having that level playing field. So, you know, we were definitely encouraged by the push to ensure that there are good representation.
I could talk for a long time about this, but I mean, a lot, because I know how I came up. So I came up as a student activist. I was a student politician, which is where I got my, that's when I organised my first sit-ins and demos and all that kind of thing. But the role of leadership training is absolutely fundamental in this. And so programs like the Joe Cox Foundation or like the Byrne Foundation, they're providing a good start, but the truth is they need radically expanding.
Well, Liam, thank you very much for your time in answering the questions as well. Like I mentioned earlier on, we've given you the pledges that we've pulled together from all those organizations working together as the key important areas that the asks that we have of the potential candidate, and getting to hear their direct view, and working with them to support in delivering those pledges and also holding them to account on that is something that we're willing to do. And it's nice to hear from you that you're willing to work with us to ensure that those pledges are part and parcel of your own manifesto, and they're not something that stand alone separately, because I mean, it's just common sense to actually work on those key matters that matters to everybody, and not just to any particular.
Yeah, I would go as far as to say as I can't deliver our plan without you. It's actually how I put it.
Good to hear. Good to hear. And just on that note, as we know, the last West Midland mayoral election the difference of one party gaining seats over the other was just a couple of thousands, 5,500 odd. And we the members that we have here, we can swing it whichever way that we want to with our influence on the people that we have, and then hence why we wanted to hear from you directly. Obviously, as you know, there are issues in the Labour camp. I mean, even recently with the Ramadan fiasco that Keir Starmer had pulled out. These don't actually sit very well. These are very concerning. But one of the key things that the way that we are working on is the person that we're supporting in our locality. What's their mantle? What are they made of, and how will they deliver, and how will they work in addressing those concerns? And so Liam, it's nice to hear from you, your thoughts and how what you said with regards to if you do become mayor, you'll ensure working with us, and also more importantly ensuring delivering those pledges and working for the good of the whole community, and also in particular the largest BME community, which is the Muslim community. I'll leave it to you, Liam, just to conclude. Prayer time is actually very imminent now, so a lot of people will need to go for that. But if you can conclude on that.
Very, very briefly, a huge thank you. I mean, we're a very street-based team. We're a very community bottom-up team. We learn everything in our communities, and the reason that I want to leave the House of Commons is because I'm just so frustrated with how I see things going. And I am, humble and genuine in what I say, that I believe in the servant model of leadership, not the hero model of leadership. And I think it is by empowering others that we will change our region and tackle the big injustices that we are so appalled by together. And genuinely, I cannot do that alone. I can only do that as a part of a team effort.